Happy to come back with one of our favorites here. He writes for Pride of Detroit and does a lot of video coverage for the All-22 coverage, which is important. I was just trying to explain that to somebody the other day, and Morgan's our specialist on that. So we're happy to bring in Morgan Cannon of Pride of Detroit. And on the way in, Morgan, what's your favorite ice cream for National Ice Cream Cone Day?
Oh, man. And yeah, what up, Ryan? Thank you for having me. I got to go Hudsonville, man. I'm a Michigan boy at heart, a Detroit kid at heart. So I go Hudsonville. What do you think about that?
I like it because I feel like you're trying to get us some sponsors here. So Hudsonville, call us.
Yes,
because we're close, and it's a good tie-in because there's a player that some people are kind of high on that's from Hudsonville.
Yes, sir. There is. I saw it I remember when I was doing my research on him, and I saw that he was from Hudsonville. I was like, oh man, like the ice cream, because I'd never really been out there. I'm a Southeast Michigan rat for the most part, but yeah, I thought that was pretty cool.
And he has, so we're for those that don't know, we're referring to Isaac Tesla, and he there's a local ice cream place. The name, I'm gapping on the name, but they partnered with Isaac, and he made his own sundae there in Hudsonville. So he would be a good one to ask this question. I have a text out to Isaac to come on the show at some point in time, but he's a little busy right now, so we'll let him we'll let him off the hook. But I actually, Morgan, I don't know if you knew this, but on our other show, I interviewed him before the draft, and he had just had his combine performance. We knew him through the local scene, and I talked to him, and I was listening to the kid. Good interview. All the things he was saying, I was like, okay, this is just too serendipitous that he just seems like a Lion. He's from here. He's a Lions fan. He had all the measurables, and I know the Lions don't always go after those, but he had the other things in addition to the measurables. I'm curious what you've seen from him. I know he hasn't had a high snap count, but I guess the thing that I was wondering, I'm a big draft guy, but I'm not a huge college guy. I watch it more now for the show. It's a little transient for me sometimes, and it kind of drops to the pro coverage. I usually cover pro more, but I guess I was looking at him and thinking all the pundits, quote unquote, were kind of in the same place on this kid. And I'm looking at him going, wait, what was it that you didn't like when he was coming out of college? I mean, I know he was at Arkansas. I know he was a little underutilized. I know he was used in the slot a little bit more, but between those measurables and the effort level and the ability to improve and transition from quarterback, usually people like those things. I was kind of scratching my head and going, wait, you guys are complaining that we gave up a couple future picks and picked this kid in the third round. Now I'm not hearing that quite as much, though.
No, and right away from either when I was at training camp or like listening to what Eric and Jeremy were writing, he stuck out. You know what I mean? And obviously, Brad Holmes coveted him. Parting with that extra capital to move up and get him. So I think it says something that the Lions really wanted him, and. He hit the ground running, and he does all the little things like you mentioned, Ryan, like sticking his nose in there. If you watch him tonight, if he plays, because I think he will play, I think he's going to be, him and Khalif are going to continue to split depending on, the formation and what they're trying to do. I think they're going to split time as that third receiver in 11 personnel when there is three receivers on the field. So I love it, man, because you watch him on the outskirts and he's pushing and shoving. He sticks his nose in there. There was a run in the preseason where, the pile was almost stopped and he just comes screaming in. It wasn't a dirty hit or anything, but he just wanted to tee off on this safety. And I was like, oh my gosh, man, this I haven't really seen this kind of like wild aggression since watching Jameson Williams' tape at Alabama, because J-Mo also loves to stick his nose in there, but quite a bit smaller than our guy, Isaac. So, yeah, it's been really impressive to see him hit the ground running. And then I knew my eyes weren't lying to me when they made the Tim Patrick deal. You know what I mean? Like, I was like, okay, so obviously the coaching staff is picking up on this too,
That was really and I tell people that kind of changed the math on the trade a little bit too, because they added it in a 6th round pick for Patrick. And I liked Patrick. I know he struggled in camp. I know the age was kind of catching up with him a little bit with the injuries from what I heard from Pride of Detroit and the other writers on the beat. But he was a good player. He was a good interim player. I thought he was just a 1 year one more year player for them. But then Isaac's ahead of schedule. I mean, because really all they needed him to do, because then people were kind of, I think, overreacting. But the idea is he just had to be able to block and understand the offense like Tim Patrick. He didn't necessarily have to do a lot other than that, but then he provides a whole separate element that Patrick, with his injury history, doesn't really have that speed element anymore. So if I know he's had the highlight reel catches, but if he's able to get out to the sideline, just the openness that creates in the offense, knowing that all 22 coverage better than I do, that's got to create a ton of space and a lot more than if Tim Patrick is in the offense.
Yeah, like at this point, the Lions already have a ton to deal with, in terms of like preparing to play them from a defensive standpoint. You just have so many weapons. So, but like you said, Ryan, adding to Slaw, there's a lot. The one-handed catches are phenomenal. Some of the craziest stuff I've ever seen being around the game of football, and I've been around it a long time. To have those be your first two professional catches is out of this world. But it's the little things, like you said. And then as he gets more reps and gets more comfortable, I think they're going to expand his route tree. And he's someone I would like to see them stretch the field. I love that. I also want to see him get the ball in his hands where he can make people miss and then run through some people. I think you've seen him up close a couple of times. Yeah, that's a big kid. Like he's built,
Well, they talk about the whole size speed thing and then kind of take it down a little bit and say, oh, well, we don't look for that. It's like, but yeah, if you find the traits and then he also has size and speed, I don't think you turn that away. And that's kind of how he is. My mom, who is in studio, sent me the information on the ice cream here. It's the Little Dipper Cafe in Hudsonville that he's partnered with. So I wanted to give them a shout out.
Oh, I love it.
But my co-host Ty has a question here for you, Morgan.
Yeah, so we kind of touched on, obviously, Tesla quite a bit here, and I'm in quite agreement with everything that's been said. Obviously, Morgan, you said about him and Khalif kind of touching that wide receiver 3 spot. But I'm absolutely loving what you said, because he is obviously a very big frame. He has speed. We've obviously seen his hands. One of my favorite moments so far this season, he was on Amon-Ra's podcast, and he was saying he's only had 2 catches, but he only needed 1 hand. And so I think a lot of Detroit fans are obviously oohing and ahhing over that. But like Ryan touched on, I think we're really starting to see what Isaac can be for this team. And as his snaps increase, I'm wondering if that's something that you're looking into as well.
Yeah, because I want to see him get some of the routes that, they gave to Tim Patrick, obviously, like running those deep digs, like remember people call it like the Josh Reynolds route, like that dig at like 13, 14 yards sometimes, depending on the landmark. I want to see him run those. I want to see him as his snaps expand. I want to see those targets, tick up a little bit. I know there's a lot of mouths to feed, but like think about hitting Tesla on one of those drags that they hit J-Mo with when they run clear outs from the other side, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So like that's the stuff I want to see, and I think if we get more of that, it's just like where do you begin to try to slow down the Lions offense? Just with everybody at full tilt with Jameer and Amon-Ra and Jameson and Laporta, and it goes on and on. So if you add a player like Tesla to that, like I know people have mentioned the name Puka Nacua. I see shades of that, but I think there's a little something else in there, like with the ability to high point balls and just use his frame kind of like a basketball player. But yeah, I could rant about this kid a lot, and I don't really fall for receivers often, but when you block and you want to be physical and nasty like Tesla, man, it endears you. It endears the player to me for sure.
I agree with you, Morgan. I've heard the Puka Nacua comp. I understand it because he's kind of a guy that snuck through the process and then got drafted late and then showed out with the former Lions quarterback over there in LA. But Tesla profiles as something different to me too. It's not an insult to Nacua or him. It's just that I think he's a little different profile. I don't know if I have my finger on it exactly of what he is, but like you said, there are some of those traits that are a little different. And I know you will be with me here on this, Morgan. Khalif Raymond is an important part of this team, and I like that he's getting more snaps at the beginning of the year. I think that's going to behoove them as, as the season rolls on, because he was an important part of the offense, especially 2 years ago. Then last year, Patrick kind of took over, but having maybe a new and improved version of Patrick that's able to do some of those things that you're talking about, that's more of a hybrid for this offense, and still having a full health Khalif Raymond really gives them a lot of weapons. Because Raymond, he must show up a lot on the All-22 when he's in there, because I like him. He doesn't necessarily pop with a lot of stats unless he's playing Tennessee, I guess. But for the most part, he doesn't normally pop, but I'm sure he pops on the All-22 tape and creates a lot of space and issues for the defense as well.
Yeah, and like you said, I think Khalif will always have a place as long as he's here, even as Tesla starts to chew in more into those, the snaps and take more of the share. But you're absolutely right. Khalif, when he is out there, he kind of has, not to the same degree, but a similar effect like Jameson has, where he'll run clear out routes. I call them for love of the game routes. Like, Goff's probably not going to look your way, but we know the safety is going to look at you, and we'll be able to run this dig right underneath it, or run this drag, underneath it. So that's kind of what you see from Khalif when he is out there. And then, you can do stuff with him where he's like, would they run that end around the other day to him, but it got like 9 yards. And if he is somebody, if he hits his stride, to your point, Ryan, like he can take it to the house. Like you mentioned we saw with Tennessee. That game was so funny.
It's not a break when you have Khalif Raymond in there, which I think is kind of the best compliment I can give. People don't necessarily focus on him because, like you said, I think one thing that's interesting about how they built this receiver room, obviously they've gotten some good value, and then they spent on J-Mo both in the draft and now with the contract. But I remember 2 or 3 years ago when they were kind of building up, and it was clear that they needed that third receiver to complement J-Mo and Amon-Ra. And I remember everybody wanted, or not everybody, but there were a group of fans that wanted DeAndre Hopkins. And I was trying to explain the concept. I know, I knew you would be able to be with me on this. I was trying to explain the concept of, okay, there's one ball and we have to feed the tight end, Amon-Ra underneath. We have to make room for J-Mo over the top. We can't have another guy in here, and this is an appropriate conversation to have because he's on the opposing team tonight, but we can't have another guy in here that's going to demand the ball. They even mentioned that on the broadcast last week for Baltimore, that they've got to throw this fade to Hopkins in the end zone so that he doesn't basically get mad. And so when I saw that, I was like, see, this is exactly what I was saying. And Patrick was a perfect fit from that. I would argue that he's a much better fit than Hopkins. And then once I said that to people, they were like, well, he's not a better receiver than Hopkins. I said, that's not the issue. It's the fit in the system. And now Tesla is giving you that, but he's also giving kind of a high end potential there too.
Yeah, and he can do, as he gets more comfortable in this offense, and I really just try to tell people, if you're trying to think of it in layman's terms, it's like reading at a 5th grade level, and then reading at a 10th grade level, and then if you're Jared Goff in this system, you're probably reading at a 400 level in college, type of deal. So as Tesla gets more comfortable in the offense and they can put more on his plate, I love what he can unlock, because he can be the big Y in some sets. He can be the true X, outside, out wide, and be that big body guy you throw back shoulders to and things like that. So he's somebody I could see in terms, I like that you brought up the mouths to feed too, and we didn't even mention the running backs.
Right.
So yeah, I did not agree. I love DeAndre Hopkins as a player, but yeah, not a fit here when you have All-Pro Amon-Ra, big contract Jameson Williams, and yada yada. So I do think though, if Tesla does continue to develop, if we're looking at somebody's targets being impacted, I do think it would be Laporta's, just because they'd be occupying some of the similar routes and stuff and concepts and maybe the middle of the field So what do you think about that? I do think if we had to pick somebody, that's who I would probably pick.
I agree with that. I do think one of the things that's nice about this team, and that's kind of the point with Hopkins too, is there aren't a lot of players that are going to get upset with target reduction. You even mentioned J-Mo. He may look like a guy that obviously wants the ball because he's a speedster. He's going over the top and he's used to getting the ball all through his life. But that, like you said, Morgan, that kid loves the block. He wants to go out there. And so he's okay with not getting the ball. Amon-Ra is okay either way. And Laporta is becoming a better blocker. Obviously, they've got Wright as the inline tight end, but who we haven't brought up yet and is an important part of the offense. But Laporta is the type that I think can kind of flex either way. So I feel like that is a good choice there, because if you're putting Tesla on the field, then Raymond's not going to be on the field. You've got Laporta there, and I have to imagine that he's going to cut into that. But the good thing is they're all going to be happy for each other, and that's a real positive. But yeah, I'm glad we got to talk about Isaac. We're becoming basically the promotional arm of Isaac Tesla because we're here near Hudsonville. But I mean, obviously we're trying to be objective, but objectively, these are the things that are happening. I am rooting for the kid. There's no question about that. But it's just cool to see how well he's adjusted. So I'm glad we got into that conversation with him, especially with somebody that has seen the greater all 22 stuff. But I want to switch to the defense after the break here. We're going to take a quick break and come back with Morgan Cannon of Pride of Detroit. Stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. I are coming back here with Morgan Cannon of Pride of Detroit. We covered the offensive side of the ball, so we'll move to the defense. I always do this, Morgan, because the running game is great. And if you have notes on the running game, I'm open to them for sure. But we have been focusing on the receivers because of the kind of flux of the offseason. But I do want to get your take on the defense, because obviously they're installing a new system too. I think there's a little too much talk about the installation of the new offense versus and then basically none on the installation of the new defense. We automatically go to the offense, which is fairly typical, but I'm curious what you're seeing on the all 22 in the first couple games here with the defense and kind of how that's coming together, because obviously I feel like the two kind of hot button issues right now are obviously that the pressure for the defensive line, because the pressure drives a lot of things for this defense, and then the cornerback play, because they're isolated a little bit more back there to get said pressure. And now you've got Davenport going out, but it seems to me like Muhammad is looking better this year after a full offseason with the team. So I'm curious what you have kind of on the defense and what's stuck out to you.
Yeah, so a lot of things did stay at least somewhat similar going from Aaron Glenn to Kelvin Shepard. But like you said, it's still a new play caller. There's still, him and Jack have to, obviously Kelvin Shepard's coached Jack for a while, but it's a different dynamic having that headset and, having the green dot and everything like that. So, yeah, I've seen some good and some bad. So against the Packers, they were mostly pretty clean. There was just a couple plays where, honestly, Green Bay just executed flawlessly. Like that deep shot to Dobbs where Terrion was in coverage. That was just perfectly designed. Like, no one was really at fault. I think one of the reporters tried to ask Kelvin Shepard, if, Kirby was at fault there, and Shepard said Kirby did exactly what he was supposed to do on that play. And I was like, okay, so I guess I was right when I was looking at that. But to answer your question, I like Al-Quadin Muhammad. I think he's a good player opposite Hutchinson. They're going to kind of just, especially with Davenport on IR for the next 4 weeks, they're going to kind of just piecemeal that together. So they'll use Muhammad, they'll use Pat O'Connor, at the big end, if they want to get big on their defensive line. So there's options. I do think Shepard is going to settle in as a play caller a little bit more. There was some funky stuff going on in week 1 against the Packers, but that's kind of to be expected, just a feeling out process. But I thought he settled in really well against the Bears. But tonight, I will say, I wanted to set the table. In my opinion, Lamar Jackson's one of the 2 scariest players in the NFL with him and Josh Allen. They can just affect the game so many ways. So I'm going to be interested to see how Shep attacks this, because you can't really spy Lamar. I know fans, that's a hot button thing. People want their teams to spy a guy like Lamar Jackson, but the issue is no one has an athlete like Lamar Jackson. So spying him is kind of just burning a player, if you will. You're down 10-11 already. So I'll be interested to see. I think they're going to be conservative with their rush lanes and just kind of crush the pocket and hopefully be able to not let Jackson escape and do what he did. What week was that in 2023 when they just curb stomped the Lions?
Oh, that was early. I'd have to look it up. I'll look it up as Ty's asking you the next question here, but it was early, and that was a sad game. I did watch it because I watch all the games, but that was the one game I missed because I was at a wedding during that time, and they were like, "Oh, well, don't watch it." I'm like, "No, I have to watch it. I just have to wait a little bit because I know what I'm getting into, so I have to be in the right mood to take this on." But you're right about Lamar. I mean, that is something that I think it gets a little underrated with him. I don't know why we do this with Lamar, but he is, I agree with you. I think you put it well, one of the top guys in the league. And then people I don't know how you look at that guy and go, you know what? I need more from you. You're not really doing enough for me, which is what I feel like he gets a lot. And I'm kind of like, okay, so we're not going to demand that out of the other players that are not quite as good as him. We're just going to go to him and go, yeah, well, you throw, you run, you've improved, you're throwing a lot. You've held up and been durable for the run for the most part. This offense is built around you. You've won MVP. You've won playoff games. Why don't you catch the ball too? Why don't you make it just like Charlie Brown and throw it to yourself and then catch it? It's just funny to me. But yeah, I'm going to look up what week that was. It was early in the season, and then Ty's got a question for you in the meantime here.
Yeah, so it's interesting with this matchup because obviously, like we were just saying, the brutal matchup that we had that none of us Lions wanted to watch. But with this matchup tonight, I was telling Ryan this earlier. So this is obviously the past couple times we've lost to them, the brutal matchup, and then losing on a record-setting field goal by Justin Tucker. And now the Lions see them with obviously a beast in the backfield of Derrick Henry. And we all know Lamar Jackson. They always call him the running quarterback. Who on the Lions defense or a couple guys, or how do you think their scheme is, or what's the big takeaway tonight to kind of limit those guys, and who do you think really needs to step up to kind of limit this offense to a very small amount of yards?
Yeah, for sure. So I think it's a couple step process. I think first of all, you play similar to how you played the Ravens 2 times ago when they actually should have beat them earlier in the Campbell and Holmes regime, but they lost, like you said, Ty, on that record-setting field goal because they really did keep Lamar in check in that game. If you remember, like he was running around, he took a couple sacks, and like he converted either like a 3rd or a 4th and 18. To extend that game. I remember that because that was a backbreaker. I was like, oh God, I know how this is going to end. And sure enough. So to answer your question, I think it's twofold. So I think you have to stop Henry. You can't let him get going just with the traditional running game because the Ravens present too much to a defense on neutral downs. And what I mean by neutral downs are like, 2nd and 3, 2nd and 4, where everything's on the table, play action pass, quarterback run, traditional handoff. It's just too much to deal with. And I think that's where the Ravens go for their knockout blows because they're like, okay, if we don't get this shot, we can probably just convert the next down and keep on rolling. But that's how they create a lot of their explosives. So I think if you limit Henry and, the Browns held him, I think it was 11 carries for 23 yards last week. That'll work for me. Like, don't let him get going. And then if I were going to peg somebody to have like a monster game, like put a star on his name, I would say Brian Branch, just because his skill set is kind of right for this game with him being able to cover tight ends, backs, tackle in open space, be physical in the box because the Ravens are going to run some of that, the 21 personnel where they have 2 backs and a tight end and with multiple skill players in the backfield next to Lamar. So I think Brian Branch is tailor-made for a game like this, and I would think this will be one of the games where Kelvin Shepard relies on zone probably the most in the season, just because you don't I think, in my opinion, playing man against Lamar too much is like playing with fire, because if you have DBs running with receivers down the field and he's scrambling, they don't know what's going on, except maybe if they hear the crowd yelling. So, in my opinion, I'm hoping we'll see a lot more zone tonight, just to try to keep the game in front of them.
That's a good point, Morgan. I'm glad you said that, because Ty was talking before the show about the fact that they're kind of instituting a little bit more zone. So I'm glad you mentioned that. That's an interesting point there. You guys are also making me sad bringing up all these Ravens games from the past. I brought up the game. It was week 8 that year in late October, and I'm looking at the box score right now, and Gus Edwards went for 144 yards combined receiving and rushing in that game, and that was Gus Edwards, and now they're facing Derrick Henry, but they're also in a different spot here too. So I'm curious what you think. That was great analysis of the game, especially the zone piece, and great interview as always. I'm curious what you think, how you think this is going to play out, and what you think kind of score wise here, what you're expecting to see.
Yeah, man. So I predicted 31-28 Ravens, I think, on the website. But I've had a little bit of a change of heart, man. I think I've been thinking about this a little bit too much, but I'm going to go Lions 35, Ravens 31. And yeah, to your point too, that to add a little more context to the 2023 game, that was like really the first game Todd Monken reached into his, horrible bag of tricks. Like, no one had really seen what the Lions were, or what the Ravens were doing, until they kind of hit the Lions with the kitchen sink. So I'm hoping that pays dividends too, just having a little bit more film on him this time, obviously, and being able to prepare better.
Those are all good points, and that's very close to what Javen predicted, actually, in the first segment. Javen Hunter, who's at the game, former Raven. But great stuff as always, Morgan. We appreciate you joining the show. We'll have you back on. There was another subject I wanted to talk to you about, but we didn't get a chance to talk about that. I think you know what I'm talking about. But we'll have time later in the year. I'm sure there will be more things to talk about there. But tell the people where they can follow you in between, because you got to, if you're wanting more insights on the all 22 coverage, Morgan's one of the go-to guys on that.
I appreciate the kind words, man. And yeah, anytime, just hit me on Twitter and I'll be happy to join the show. You can find me on prideofdetroit.com for all of our written work. We do a lot of video content at Pride of Detroit on YouTube, your podcast feed, all of that. So yeah, be sure, if you're looking for more in-depth analysis and everything else in between, definitely check us out at prideofdetroit.com.
Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh is brought to you by Mary Freebed, Collectible Insurance Services, West Michigan Eye Care Associates, Eric Hall, DDS, Calder Financial Group, Grand Management, Rydan Investments, JH Realty Partners, and Encore Business Group. Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh airs live Monday nights, 7 p.m. Eastern on Jethro.fm.
Stay informed and stay vigilant.